The world is a very busy place. Ever since humans started bustling around, building cities, driving cars, flying around in planes, it's become harder and harder to find a place that's not full of our noise. But for the first part of this year, the coronavirus stopped, or at least slowed down, a lot of that activity. You can measure that drop in human activity in lots of ways. In dollars, if you're looking at a sudden drop in trade. In CO2, if you're looking at the ways staying home keeps us from burning fossil fuels. Or in sound. When humans aren't around, making all the noise we usually make, we actually have a chance to listen to what the world sounds like without us. This is The Briny, a podcast about how we're changing the sea and how the sea changes us. I'm Matt Frassica. I've been thinking about how that quiet sounds in the ocean, whether there are fewer oil tankers and cruise ships and fishing boats, and whether that might make a difference for the animals who live under the surface. To help answer this question, I got in touch with Rosalind Rolland.
I'd sure like to be out there collecting samples right now.
She's a research veterinarian at the New England Aquarium, and she studies the North Atlantic right whale,
which is a highly endangered whale that ranges along the east coast of North America.
About 20 years ago, she was worried about those right whales because they weren't doing so well.
At that time, reproduction levels, the calving rates had plummeted in the population. Essentially, very few calves were being born to this very small population of whales. And I became interested as a veterinarian in how I could start to study that.
So she went to this research station in Maine, right up near the Canadian border.
I was with the right whale research team at the New England Aquarium, and we were up in the Bay of Fundy in Canada, where the aquarium has had a long-term 40-year project studying this small population of whales.
The Bay of Fundy was the place to study right whales back then.
Up to half or more of the population would pass through the Bay of Fundy every summer and fall to feed, and also females bring their calves there to nurse them and grow them up.
It's a little bit different now. The whales have shifted their migration patterns thanks to climate change. But 20 years ago, Rosalind Rolland had this question rolling around in her head. Were the whales having trouble reproducing because they were under stress?
Because we know that animals in captivity and in the wild that are under a lot of pressure from different sources can shut down reproduction completely.
But how do you check stress levels in whales?
I figured out, along with my collaborators, that you could actually measure hormones in scat samples from right whales.
Scat samples, as in whale poop.
So manure or scat, there are metabolites of hormones that are preserved in those samples, and you can measure them and learn something about the whale. So all of a sudden we had a window into the internal workings of a whale that weighs 50 tons that you cannot catch and get a blood sample from.
And how do you find whale scat?
Everybody asks that question. So initially we would just see a whale defecate and go over and collect the sample, take a picture of the whale. And of course, you sort of have to wait around for the whale to decide to donate a sample.
Eventually, they trained dogs to sniff out the whale poop floating on the water. But at this point, they were still going out to catch whales in the middle of their morning poo.
We generally leave quite early in the morning, usually at daybreak, and head out into the Bay of Fundy, which is, depending on the boat you're on, an hour or more, and where the whales are in the Bay of Fundy, offshore.
But this one morning was different.
I remember it was just an absolutely clear blue sky Colorado type day. It was beautiful weather, which is not always the case up in that neck of the woods. It's often foggy and nasty and blowing, but there was a little bit of wind, and so we delayed our departure by a couple of hours to let the winds die down so that we, wasn't so rough out on the water. And we went down, there's a little local coffee shop right near the dock, and we walked in there, and The woman, Shirley, behind the counter said to us, there's been a plane flew into the World Trade Center. And we were like, what? We were just very confused. What are you talking about? And then we ended up going back up to our research station and turning on the television, and just in time to see the second plane hit. And yeah. So as for everybody in this country, it was just one of those moments that seared into your consciousness forever. Eventually, we all decided, well, the best approach we can make is to go ahead and go out to sea. There's nothing we can do for the people in New York City, and really the Bay of Fundy is sort of like our cathedral. It's a place that gives you a lot of solace to be outside in nature. And we decided to go to sea. So we did. We went out to sea, and we had a period of high pressure, meaning we had beautiful weather for September 11th and the following week. So we were out every day, and there was like being on a primal ocean. There was no other boats. There were no planes going overhead. We usually see large ship traffic and fishing boats and airplanes, and, there's activity out there. We were alone. And it was just astonishing out at sea during that week.
Have you encountered conditions like that any other time in your career?
When I was in the subantarctic Auckland Islands on my way down there, yes, we didn't see a boat we saw one boat in 3 weeks. But never around in this part of the world, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're out there, you're experiencing greatly reduced traffic, and what are you thinking at that point? Do you think that this is going to yield an interesting result?
No, actually, it didn't even occur to me at the time. And in fact, it took me several years to realize the kind of data that we had. It's a little hard looking back for me to believe it, but I wasn't really thinking about underwater noise at that point. It actually took quite a long time and for me to put the pieces together.
Almost a decade later, Rollin was invited to give a talk on the way noise puts stress on whales.
And getting ready for that workshop, I had one of those aha moments, and I was like, oh my God, I never looked at the before September 11th and after September 11th stress hormone data, and I have it. And when we took a good look at that data, it turned out that it was very different, a dramatic drop in stress hormones from before September 11th until after, and that was completely statistically significant compared to the 4 following years in which that did not happen.
The whales showed much lower levels of stress hormones right after September 11th. And what changed after September 11th? Well, the Bay of Fundy was this primal ocean with a lot fewer ships coming through. And although Rollin was studying stress hormones, some other scientists in her group were doing research on whale song. And they had hydrophones, underwater microphones, in the water every day to record these whale songs. But they were also recording all of the background noise.
And acoustic recordings showed us this very significant drop in low-frequency underwater noise, which is under 200 hertz. And that's the frequency band range where underwater ship noise is the loudest, and that also is the frequency range in which right whales communicate. So there's this huge 6 dB drop in noise and a huge drop in stress hormones in that year only.
Rosalind Rollin didn't expect to do an experiment on the effects of underwater noise on whale stress. She didn't even realize that she'd done that experiment until about a decade had passed. The world just created the conditions for a new experiment by suddenly getting quiet. And she happened to be there to capture the data. So what's happening right now? Are we going through a similar quiet moment thanks to the coronavirus? There's plenty of data showing that trade is down, but no one had figured out if that really meant there was less noise in the water. Until David Barkley.
My name is David Barkley. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Oceanography at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia, Canada.
Barkley studies ocean acoustics. And full disclosure, I met David Barkley 20 years ago when we were both in our first year of university together at McGill in Montreal.
Lockie told me I was supposed to say sassafras.
Anyway, David told me there's so much ship traffic in the ocean that if you're listening at the right frequency, around 100 hertz, which is this.
In this frequency band, so in the 100 hertz type band, you can pretty much always hear ships no matter where you are in the Atlantic or the Pacific. Basically, no matter where you go in the deep ocean, you can more or less hear in the very background ships rumbling away.
And is 100 hertz, that's pretty low.
That's low. That's like, you'd want a good subwoofer to get a good 100 hertz, when you're driving down the street.
Yeah.
But like low on the piano keyboard. So in the deep ocean, you have this constant sort of, background noise. You can kind of hear it everywhere. In the shallow ocean, the problem is, you have animals and ships sharing relatively confined space. So a ship comes by, and the animals are getting blasted by the sound because it's quite close.
When the pandemic hit and classes were canceled, Barkley was trying to figure out something to do to keep his students busy.
I kind of don't care if anyone does any work at all, but I'm supposed to be somewhat inspirational or something. So I thought I should be doing some work. But the thought of working on just business as usual was a little bit nauseating.
So with no lab and no way to do any experiments, Barkley went looking for underwater microphones he could listen to. And he found a set of them off Vancouver on the west coast of Canada.
There's 3-4 years of data, of hydrophone data at some of these locations. This is an amazing data set. I'm embarrassed that I hadn't looked at it until we had a pandemic. What was I waiting for,
Barkley and his students used this data set to compare ocean noise levels before and during the coronavirus lockdown.
You always have these flat lines every quarter for 2018, 2019, and then 2020. There's just it starts going down pretty fast.
Near the port of Vancouver, they found that during the first months of the coronavirus lockdown, underwater noise dropped by 5 decibels, which doesn't sound like a lot, but...
To give you some idea, 6 dB is half the amount of power.
So, at least in that part of the Pacific, the amount of noise went down by almost half during the coronavirus lockdown. Rosalind Rollin would like to think the situation is similar for the right whales in the North Atlantic.
The whales we study, I really hope they're getting a break. They need one. And it's not just underwater noise, it's fishing gear. Now fishing activities, all activities it's not just noise this time, right? It's a multi-dimensional decrease in human activity. So certainly our hope is that they are getting a much needed break from us humans and our unintended consequences of our activities on them. We don't mean to harm whales.
The major lesson that Rosalind Rollin takes from her study of stress hormones in whales doesn't have to do with noise or with whale biology. It has to do with serendipity and looking at the data from a new point of view.
What you're finding in your data all depends upon the question you're asking, right? I wasn't asking the question of underwater noise until almost 10 years later. And then I went back and looked at that data. I was like, wow, we've got the data to look at this question. So it's just that the question you're asking is very important. And also to ask yourself, are there other questions I could be asking looking at this same data set?
Researchers like David Barkley have just started to sift through the data from this strange enforced hiatus that we've been on. It's going to be months before there's a vaccine and we can all stop wearing masks when we go to the grocery store. But it might actually take much longer before scientists ask the right questions to unlock the discoveries hidden in that data. The quieter we get, the more the planet might have to say. If you want more of The Briny, check out our website, thebriny.net, where you can listen to past episodes and find links to the show's Instagram and Twitter feeds. Sail over to Apple Podcasts to give us a review if you're in that kind of mood. And please tell your friends about the show. The Briny is a proud member of Hub and Spoke, a collective of independent podcasts. If you like this show, be sure to check out The Constant. The Constant is a science and history podcast about our amazing capacity to get things wrong. In a 2-part series called The Cold Hard Truth, The Constant tells the story of 2 explorers racing to be the first to the North Pole, and all the lying, cheating, and dirty tricks that they used to undermine each other. The episode also includes a fascinating detour into scurvy, a mysterious disease that killed mariners for centuries and that was, at great length, finally cured with cocktails.
Scurvy could be prevented or cured with citrus. British sailors were given a daily ration of lemon juice mixed with rum, sugar, and water. Delicious.
You can listen to The Constant at constantpodcast.com and check out all of Hub and Spoke's shows at hubspokeaudio.org. Stay safe out there.
Hub
and Spoke Audio Collective.